We'd like to welcome you to this, the first in a series of virtual events on the theme of challenging research for sustainability. So we're going to be exploring issues of transdisciplinary methods, relationships, politics and praxis. As many of you may have been engaged with STEP's work over the recent years, STEP's has long been engaged in the theory and practice of transdisciplinary research for sustainability over its nearly 15-year history. And in this, the first event of the series, we wanted to reflect a bit on this rich history, to revisit some of the ideas that have been particularly influential in our thinking around methods, notably those around opening up and broadening out research and the metaphor of pathways to sustainability, asking if and how these ideas and normative goals remain relevant in today's moment of multiple intersecting crises, and considering perhaps what ongoing tensions, ideas or concepts may have been underexplored in our thinking around transdisciplinary methods to date. We'll then be hearing from researchers working with these concepts in different ways in transdisciplinary research and action contexts in Argentina, Mexico and Kenya. Before I hand over to Marina, who will introduce our speakers, I just wanted to briefly sketch out what we mean when we talk about challenging research for sustainability, which, as I mentioned, is the overarching framing for our series of events for the year. So we landed on this term challenging research because it has a kind of satisfyingly plural number of possible interpretations, all of which are relevant to our discussions and which signpost the different kinds of issues related to methods that we hope to explore over the course of this event and the rest of the year. So on the most straightforward level, the idea that transdisciplinary research is challenging research simply draws attention to the fact that it is or can be difficult. It requires embracing complexity, multiplicity and uncertainty, getting to grips with the messiness of diverse social worlds, working across disciplinary, professional and political divides, and sometimes making oneself vulnerable or putting oneself in uncomfortable situations. This is kind of the nature of the beast of transdisciplinary research. It's challenging, and researchers need to think creatively and imaginatively about the kinds of methods that can rise to this challenge. But the phrase can also be read with a slightly different emphasis. So sustainability is challenging research in that it can, or perhaps should, challenge power. So in this sense, the methodological conversation is about the kinds of configurations and repertoires of methods that can help sustainability researchers work with others, be they activists, policymakers, local communities, and so on, to challenge the status quo of unsustainable practices or structures, lobbying for policy change, bearing witnesses to abuses of power, or working in other ways for change towards more sustainable futures. Thirdly, sustainability crucially challenges research and researchers to be aware of the ways in which power acts on research itself. So, for example, through shaping ideas of what problems are deemed to be important and researchable, what kinds of methods are appropriate, what and whose kinds of knowledges are legitimate. So recognizing the ways in which power can act to shape research by favoring and emphasizing methods that engineer some degree of artificial closure, or methods that result in neat simplifications of reality that lend themselves to simple policy narratives. So hence, in this sense, sustainability challenges research to recognize and work to counter these dynamics. Fourthly and finally, the lens of challenge serves to draw attention to how we think about the relationship between research, knowledge and action. And here we might say that sustainability presents a challenge to research and researchers to broaden out our ideas about impact, to take ideas of co-production and transdisciplinarity seriously, and so exploring what these mean for our thinking around methods. So that's our challenging research theme for the year in a nutshell. We'll be finalizing a program of events soon, and we'll be publicizing details about upcoming methods-related discussions on our website and our newsletter in due course. So keep an eye out if you're interested in continuing these kinds of discussions. We've got some great speakers lined up today, but we're also keen, as far as possible in this kind of online space, to generate some more open discussion. So we'll be having 2 speakers followed by a 20-minute plenary, and then 2 further sessions followed by another 20-minute plenary. And throughout those, we'll be using the chat in Zoom, and hi to everyone who's already said hello on the chat. So if you'd like to ask a question of a particular speaker, please indicate who you're asking your question to and pop it in the chat. Depending on how many questions come up, we'll either group them into themes or we will ask people to unmute and put the question themselves. In addition, we're going to be experimenting with an online polling tool called Mentimeter. So we're going to be asking a number of questions over the course of the webinar to try and get involvement from as many people as possible. I will now hand over to Marina to introduce herself and take you through the first Mentimeter process and then introduce our speakers. Thanks.
Thanks very much, Rose. Hi, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. It's lovely to have everybody with us today, and so a warm welcome from myself as well. My name is Marina Apka. I'm a research fellow at the Institute of Development Studies, and together with Rose, we'll be working on this year of methods. And my research is focused on transdisciplinary methods, and I'm particularly interested in how we understand them both to generate knowledge and action, and to do so with marginalized or excluded populations. So lots to dig into this year around that. So as Rose said, we wanted to start this with getting a sense of who's in the room. It's one of the hardest things with these virtual events we're running now, is to really understand what people are bringing in. So we thought we'd experiment a bit and use the Mentimeter tool to try and kind of warm up, if you like, the collective space we're in virtually. So if Nathan can put the Menti details in the chat, that would be great. And we'll start with the first little question to get us warmed up, which is, what methods have you used, or indeed have you encountered in your involvement with sustainability related research? And you may not all be researchers, and so some might have encountered them through engagement in sustainability challenges, or as a participant, or a bystander. So any of those we'd like to hear about. So if you go to menti.com and you put the code 4066, and now I've lost the code, 834 in, hopefully the question will be coming up, and we'll have a look and see what starts to come up. So we have some qualitative methods, focus group discussions, ethnography. Then we have some interdisciplinary methods coming up. And as we can see, some of them are methods at the level of a tool. Some of them are broader approaches. Some of them are focused on specific themes, urban labs, transdisciplinary urban labs. What else do we have? Quantitative as well, arts-based, that's the space that we're asking deeper questions about now. So some more classic methods and some perhaps more newer, anticipatory. I'd love to hear more about what that is. Workshops, different types, different stakeholders. Design methods, and more and more. And we should have said that we'll be also using some of what you're all sharing to help us think about how we shape the conversation going forward. Great, so that gives us a sense of who's in the room, which is people with very diverse methodological experiences. Technology stock modeling, I'd love to know more about that. We're going to have to follow up with some of you on these. Okay, so if we move now to the next question, which I should be able to do. So now we'd like to hear what words come to mind when you think about or you describe transdisciplinary research methods. And these words can be, for example, metaphors, or they could be emotions or adjectives, or anything that comes to mind when you think about describing transdisciplinary research methods. Uncomfortable, messy, transgressive, complex. lots of words that elicit senses of participation. And challenging, complex, messy, collaboration. Systemic, co-production. Engaged. I saw one small one, enriching there. Brilliant. So to our speakers, you might be inspired by some of these words as you share your thoughts with the group. Fun, that's a brilliant one. Good to remember, the fun. Great, well, thank you all for participating in our first Menti experiment. So without further ado, we should now turn to our first speakers. So as Rose explained, please put your questions to them in the chat, and when we'll come to the plenary, we'll be able to address those. And so in this first block, we'll have two speakers, and I'll introduce them both now, and then you can hand over to each other. So first of all, we're hearing from Andy Sterling, who is the co-director of the STEP Centre and a professor in the Science Policy Research Unit at the University of Sussex. And Andy works on issues of power and uncertainty in research and innovation. And he has been central to discussions and work around methods in the STEP Centre for some years now. And he's going to help situate today's discussion a little bit in that broader context of the work that STEPS has done, and I'm sure bring forward some new and challenging ideas for us. And then we'll have Annabelle Marin, who is going to provide a bit of a response, also involved in STEPS work for some years. She's recently joined IDS. Welcome to IDS, Annabelle, as leader of the Business, Markets and States research team. And she's the director of BioLeft. Until January, Annabelle was senior researcher in the Science, Technology and Innovation Policies at the National Council for Scientific and Technical Research, or CONACYT, in Argentina. And she was the director of the Research Center for Transformation, or CENIT. So brilliant. I think we can hand over now to Andy.
Great. Thank you very much, Marina. I'll just flip over seamlessly and professionally to my slides. Oh, great. I think that worked. Thank you so much for inviting me. Oh, my backlight's gone off. I'll put it on again. It's really great to be here. What a great start with all those ideas bubbling away from the beginning. And yes, as you introduced, Marina, I'm here in the kind of role of the slightly aging character, looking back to the old days over the grand period of 15 years that STEPS has been beavering away in all the networks that are fantastically represented here in this meeting. And I'm going to talk about how this so-called STEPS pathways approach has conditioned our approach to methods, what we've learned, and what the things we've done and the things that remain rather embarrassingly undone or only realized at the last minute. So that's the kind of thing I'm going to kick us off with. And really, I guess the starting point is to just recap what the pathways approach is all about. It's about trying to shift not only academic and policy discourse, but politics more widely around sustainability from a kind of one-track way forward approach to the recognition and appreciation for multiplicities of pathways. There is no area of life relevant to sustainability where there are not multiplicities of paths going forward from that point which change could follow. And of course, what tends to happen is the kinds of change that get talked about, and therefore more likely the kinds of change that actually occur, are those that are favored by the most powerful interests, the loudest voices. So for methods then, the challenge that we began with which we picked up from many colleagues around the world at the beginning, was the question of how work in academia, which of course is our main location, or indeed other privileged settings that produce or which critique knowledge, can be more deliberately, intentionally oriented towards concrete actions to support emancipatory struggles. And by that I mean struggles for greater pluralities of alternative pathways for change, just to get a better chance for these marginalized pathways, because they are normally ignored, sidelined, suppressed, and quite often actively oppressed in the world in which we live, whether it's in the energy sector, housing, the way cities develop, the way communications take place, the way food is produced, etc. And doing those things without inadvertently reinforcing the privilege that we undoubtedly have begun with, for the best of intentions, simply giving volume to our own voice, or even worse, appropriating, again inadvertently, the voices of others. So it's a pretty tough challenge. And as a means to that end, then, we kind of dimly grasped right from the beginning, but we learned more about that as we went through, that there wasn't like a defined set of methods for doing that. Maybe it's better viewed as a challenge of hacking methods, because there's so many diverse methods can, in particular conditions, be useful to that kind of agenda. So it's about hacking methods in order not to sort of, in a linear, deterministic way, do the job, but to help reshape wider practices and institutions. The challenge is that methods are like little seeds. They can go into a given context, and with a fair wind and a bit of luck, they might actually help to be generative of the kinds of things we want to see. So we then, and here working especially with our partners around the world in this present STEPS consortium, and with the summer school practitioners who came in over a number of years and engaged with us there, we developed a framework for thinking about methods based on two basic parameters: what goes in, what comes out. And in order to hack these power-ridden environments that methods have to subsist in, whether in academia or in wider policy debates, these two qualities mean the following. What goes in, the inputs, can be relatively narrow or relatively broad. And they can be so in a number of dimensions: the kinds of challenge they address, the kinds of options for action that are illuminated, the kinds of harms or benefits that are taken into account, the degree to which fairness and distributional issues are central to what's being attended to, the question of whether uncertainties are addressed at all, and if so, to what depth and what degree, and crucially, the kinds of perspectives that are involved. All these you could see as inputs to the method of various kinds. How do methods engage with all these different dimensions as things they attend to? But there's another dimension to this role of methods, which is not what goes in, but what comes out. How the method engages with wider processes of knowledge production and of policymaking and wider politics as a whole, in order to help inform, shape, catalyze change. And here you've got the challenge of opening up, not broadening out the inputs, but opening up the outputs. And what that means in effect is, do methods simply crank out a particular answer? Or do they actually inform those who they're speaking to about how the answer depends on how you frame the question? So they don't say, here's our conclusion. They say, if you assume X, then the conclusion would be A. If you assume Y, then the conclusion would be B. And that's entirely independent of how broad the inputs are. You can have a very broad-based method with lots of inputs, like a big global assessment, which cranks out one deterministic answer. For instance, the IPCC is an example of that. And likewise, you can, from a rather narrow base, actually open up all kinds of very salient questions. So that was our basic framework for thinking about methods. And in doing that, what we've tried to strive to do is to show how that is in principle applicable right across all the various dividing lines between methods. There's lots of jealously guarded boundaries, actively policed borderlines, occasional raids across borders from one group to another. between expert and participatory, quantitative, qualitative, analytic, deliberative, interpretive methods. And in principle, we believe that this framework applies to all of them. So one can think about all kinds of methods in this ways. So for instance, a conventional quantitative analysis might be very precise in what it says to policymaking, ordering the different pathways that might be pursued very sort of definitively, or it can acknowledge uncertainties, or it can actually deliberately unpick how different perspectives, different values, different assumptions in appraisal lead to different answers. But likewise, that's true of qualitative or interpretive or participatory work, which can focus on consensus, common ground, verdicts in citizens' juries, or can instead, in a similar way, try and illuminate how different ways of being, ways of thinking, ways of knowing lead to very contrasting conclusions without having to force and engineer consensus or a conclusion. So that was our framework for thinking about the broadening out and the opening up of methods. Of course, methods are never precisely located. The devils are in details, but a crucial thing to bear in mind in this, in relation to the kinds of issues that Rose and Marina raised at the beginning and put it out very nicely in the blog that kicked off our work on methods here on the STEBS website, is that power tends to concentrate attention in the top left corner of this field. So the usual suspects of methods used in global assessments and sustainability science around the world, cost-benefit analysis, risk assessment, ecosystem services, various kinds of stakeholder collaborative techniques, are in that top left box. We don't intend to denigrate them. That's a very honorable set of practices, but they tend to be overemphasized because they tend to generate justification, help those in power to justify their authority, to foster trust, to secure acceptance, to manage blame. So that's why they tend to be emphasized. So without denigrating them, the challenge is how to restore some balance, to move a little bit more equitably to more caring rather than controlling analysis, to caring attention and recognition for different ways of being in what is a very pluralistic world. And we recognize in that, and we learned more and more as time went on, that yes, methods can help prefigure and catalyze and reinforce the emergence of more emancipatory spaces for thinking about alternative pathways to sustainability. But the circumstances in which that really works are circumstances in which collective action, political mobilization opens up the institutional space. That institutions, political agendas are disrupted, destabilized for a period that allow these kinds of methods to come in, to allow this more kind of murmurating dynamic. So we always thought this was the case, but we've really learned much more deeply over time how important that institutional structural challenge is to making methods work. You can't just engineer a situation with methods like the one that appear in the lower right of this diagram. And so, of course, then what's really going on here is a dance. It's a dance between the wider encompassing political circumstances and the kinds of approaches that are taken shaping policy imaginations and shaping or challenging those imaginations. So it's a dialectic, and the methods can help shape the environment, but the environment is crucial to the conditions in which methods can work or not. So it's about transforming underlying imaginations then and moving from this categorical, hierarchical, individualistic, controlling imagination that pervades so much sustainability science, not without denigrating it, has that the planetary dashboard kind of mentality, to more relational, mutualistic, collective understandings of the challenges of change. And in doing that, then methods can have all kinds of different kinds of registers. So it's, again, it's not thinking about one method, it's also not thinking about one way of using methods. In fact, quite often the body language around the method is as important as the actual procedural details of the methods in helping to prefigure or to catalyze or to pivot changes. So, I mean, just to give examples of that, the medium can be the message. So by opening up, even in a micro fashion in a method, we can help prefigure the kinds of changes that we're talking about, illustrate them, legitimate them. Trojan horses, where a method that appears maybe quantitative can get under the radar of a policy process, and once it gets inside, it opens up and you realize, oh my goodness, it was quantitative, but look what it's doing. It's actually exploring all these various sensitivities, all these various different kinds of answers. Or it can help pivot change in ways that perpetrate a kind of political judo where precisely the power of the structures that are being challenged can be an asset to those doing the challenging. Their depth and their extent can magnify and amplify in certain settings in ways that can be very useful if you're successful in getting a particular approach picked up. So I'm not claiming we've had huge success in any of those areas. We have moments of feeling a little bit good about it, and it's always an ongoing struggle. It's about then caring about methodologies, not just individual methods, but ways of thinking about methods for opening up. It's not just about informing the cockpit, providing a message for a planetary dashboard. That's part of the mix, crucial at times, but it tends to get overemphasized. And instead, instead of that kind of controlling idea about planning as if the planet is being controlled, we should control our way away from the sustainability challenges. It's about a more mutualistic relation. So you can relate even to those institutions in horizontal ways with these kinds of methods. It's not about plug and play. There's no method that just plugs in without being influenced by its environment. And as Rose said at the beginning, then it's about repertoires of genres, but playing music in certain ways. And in the end, it's all about this kind of murmurating dynamic. It's a remarkable thing that, at least in the rather inadequate English language, the word murmurations, which is used of these wonderful flocking behaviors you see in birds and fish, is at the same time means this exquisitely choreographed dancing dynamic of moving around where very abrupt, radical change can occur very quickly if the conditions are right. But it also means dissent, suppressed dissent. And it's quite interesting that those two meanings come together in what we're trying to talk about with methods, that methods can have these effects of diversity moving together, of adapting horizontally to others, of creating new kinds of change rather than just keeping them, and of failing. There are all kinds, when you watch these flocking behaviors, all kinds of things move off and then come back again in failures, which actually inform the movement of the whole. Of course, there's a lot that we thought we knew that actually we found out we still had to learn. It's a bit embarrassing, but you know that yes, methods, always grandiose claims I've been, for instance, rehearsing here. Methods can hack cultures, but cultures sure shape methods as well. So you can put your methods out there, but then when you see them go out there, you very often find them reverting to type and being used in ways that reflect the environments they've moved into. We began with complexity. Complexity is a very powerful metaphor, but there's a lot, it's a scaffolding, but there's much it can't build. And we've tended to move a bit away from complexity because it carries so much baggage on its own. Whilst being valid, it's not far from being enough to do this task I'm outlining. Political economy is just too heavy to leave to peripheral visions. We began by saying, yes, political economy is really important, but that's being dealt with. We didn't quite put it like that, but it was a danger of that sometimes. And you really do have to get traction with these issues. And we realized that over time. And even more beyond that, that the structures that these methods are trying to engage with in order to challenge, to pivot, to prefigure change in, are not just deep and outside. They're inside us. They're in the room with us. They constitute us. We're immersed in them. Structures of modernity, structures of coloniality, structures of patriarchy. And particularly this year, what we're thinking about with methods is how we can really explore the ways methods can engage with those very deep structures of power in the world. And we also learned, not of our own doing so much, but that organizations are expendable. What's important are these movements, these academic, intellectual, political movements are the important thing. And actually sometimes there's a great strength in a sort of churn of moving from organizational form to organizational form, because otherwise you generate your own inadvertent mini incumbencies and hegemonies without really realizing it. So that's it, really. That's an attempt to sum up some of the things we began with, some of the things we've learned along the way. We began working on methods in 2006, and I don't know if this is helpful, but one way of seeing it is it's like I try and spend time on beaches when I can, and the STEP Centre just came in like just one wave of activist scholarship among so many. There were so many waves before. There were many alongside us, which we discovered, and it's been exhilarating discovering them in the course of our work. There are many more to come. And it's through wave after wave. It's not like these struggles are things you win in a definitive way. It's a continual responsibility you pass on down and you inherit from others. And it's wave after wave, tide after tide is how beaches are shaped. And methods are part of that shaping process. So it's a real privilege to be here for this discussion today and introduce some of the themes, which I've done rather inadequately, and some of the most rewarding of these waves emerging from the networks that we've been in are here to talk today, and I'm really looking forward to hearing from them. The African Research and Impact Network, which we'll hear about later on, the Umbela organization, which we'll hear about after the break, and right now from Annabelle Marin to talk about her experiences around the development of the BioLeft initiative. So thanks very much for your attention. I hope that made at least a little bit of sense.
Okay, I guess I follow.
Yes, that was me introducing you, Annabelle. Sorry, it was not rather.
Okay, so hello from Argentina. Now I'm still here. I will try to share the screen, but I think you have to stop sharing for me to.
Yeah.
Okay. Just, I'm not, for some reason, okay, sorry, okay, it's okay. Yeah, good. So thank you for the introduction and for the invitation. It's a great responsibility to react to Andy, but I will try to do it by telling you a little bit about our experience of work with some of the ideas, approaches, and methodologies that inspired and work through the STEP network in a difficult area, which is the area of economics and economics of innovation. And it's a difficult area because here conversations are very much about money, investment, incentives, productivity, in the best of the cases, distribution. Actually, innovation scholars are still trying to convince economists about the importance of innovation and efforts and resources dedicated to innovation. So this is a difficult area to start to talk about diversity, plurality, democracy. But we, in some way or other, did it. We started to talk about that and try to link to discussions in this field. And so I will talk about that and about the journey we did on this work, and hopefully I will touch upon and illustrate some of the issues that Andy raised in the presentation. So I will do that illustrating with the work done in SEEDS, and so how we end up with BioLeft, and talking a little bit about BioLeft. And if I have time, but I think I won't, but it will be interesting with more time, because we more recently have been working also related to mining issues and challenges in Latin America. And there is even more difficult to bring the discussions, but we have started a process interesting in this area, which if I don't have to talk, time to talk now, maybe I could in any other opportunity. So starting with SEEDS, here we began research like 10 years ago with our background, my background in studies of innovation and development, asking the usual questions about innovation capabilities in domestic actors, but being actually exposed to some of the discussions that were emerging at that time related to STEP. I was lucky enough to be at SPRU at that time, and also been exposed when I come back to Argentina to the reality here in Argentina and Brazil. We started a journey where we were in more than 10 years permanently changing questions, objectives, interests, and methods, of course, and end up with the initiative that Andy mentioned, which is BioLeft in Spanish. and which is about, is a action, it started as an action research project, but now is an independent venture, which is supporting open and collaborative innovation, forms of innovations for seeds. And so, and in this journey we did, we started with traditional questions and methods, and first changed questions, still working with more traditional methods, and most recently we changed everything, questions, objectives, and new methods, and these new methods brought new questions, and so that's the kind of journey that we went through. So going a little bit into more detail, how we started. When we started in Argentina and Brazil, we were expecting, with our background, that as Argentina and Brazil were agriculture world leader agricultural countries, we will find here some interesting and important capabilities related to seeds, because it's a supplier of the agricultural sector. And in our research, we found interestingly that actually, yes, there were very innovative domestic actors, farms and public institutions, and other actors that were doing very interesting innovations by the book, very innovative. They even had a very high participation in the domestic regional markets. And interestingly, they were doing that following a different path to the one that was followed by the leaders, the large multinationals in the sector like Monsanto, Syngenta, etc. So not doing genetically modified seeds, but doing other kind of innovations. But even though they were very innovative, they struggled a lot to compete, of course, with the multinationals. And so we started to explore more and more why was that. And then we obviously started to find that that was associated to issues like power, market power, institutions, lobby. And particularly, most of these challenges were related to the fact that they were following a different path. That was the path that was even the market price, in a way, this path, because these farms were doing very well in the market, in the regional markets, the institutions didn't. So we become more interested about why that, and issues of power come up very strongly, intellectual property rights, and very interestingly also for us, issues, the importance of narratives and ideas about the future, and ideas about progress, and ideas about what GM was promising. And so these kind of lead to regulations and resources allocated to these trajectories that were not supporting the trajectories that domestic actors were following. And so at that time, we did a very interesting piece of work, which we are now revisiting, which questioned a very well spread view here about the GM centrality in the explanation of the agricultural boom in the, some years ago. And so in doing this kind of research, of course, we started to talk more and more with different kind of people, actors, and become more interested on impacts and the linkages between economic sustainability and social impacts. If, of course, también on alternative possible pathways to the ones that the large firms were pushing for. And if, as we realized very strongly, this path were not inevitably, they were not the consequence of markets of superior technological superiority, difficult to emulate. So we should be able to do something about that. We felt that we needed to do something about, to support some alternatives, some different ways of doing things in this area. And that's the way in which we started to work and think about supporting an alternative. And in this way is that we started to work with BioLeft. And so I will talk a little bit about BioLeft and what is in this context BioLeft, and is very relevant for this discussion because it's here where we started to really explore and experiment with different methods and ways of working in this particular area. So BioLF is a community lab that is working and co-designing with different kind of stakeholders tools to support open and collaborative ways of conservate, innovate, and diffuse seeds. Our principles are precisely transdisciplinarity. We work with very diverse sets of disciplines within the group. Collaboration, we collaborate with to develop these seeds, these tools, and the new knowledge that is generated within the venture. Another obviously core principle is broad participation in the group and in the networks related to STEP. We work with different kinds of farmers, researchers, civil servants, activists, supporters. And another is experimentation and innovation. We are very much interested in developing new things and new ways of addressing the challenges that we are facing in our work. Some of the things that we have managed with this within BioLF is one of them is the web platform to support participatory breeding. We are running 3 experiments of collaborative breeding. And obviously, what we are very happy about is a growing network of actors that are interested in working with us, breeders, researchers, practitioners, farmers, friends, artists, people that become interested in helping and supporting the initiative. And so to start to finish a little bit about the methods, and here it has been and it is very important the work we do with other colleagues and partners within STEP and our networks, because a lot of things are new for us. And here is Almendra, who works with me centrally in BioLF, that is here, has been very active in experimenting with different kinds of methodologies, because one of the big challenges of BioLF precisely is about communications and dialogues that the market kind of logic has over the last years have made every time more difficult, like for example between farmers and breeders. Now in the dominant regime, they only communicate about markets, and so a lot of the challenges or problems that we see in the seed related to seed are because farmers, and particularly those that are not mainstream farmers, cannot obtain the kind of seeds that they need. For example, agroecology farmers that are practicing agroecology, organic, or small and medium family farmers. And so, and they have lost the capabilities to develop and improve their own seeds, and at the same time, the mainstream system is not developing the seeds that they need. So, a lot of the work that we do at BioLF is about connecting these areas, particularly, for example, public sector breeders, which are very interested in developing seeds which are adapted and useful for these kind of farmers. And in doing so, and because these two groups have been artificially separated, we are working a lot to bring them together with participatory methodologies, working a lot inspired on work done by our colleagues in Mexico, Lakshmi. And so, for example, here I show a picture, we are showing a picture of a super mice that was done by one of the farmers. And it has a lot of characteristics that actually surprised the breeders that were participating in the work, because they were not the kind of things that they were working in their labs. So this is just to give you one of the examples, but we are actually working in many fronts and involving different kind of stakeholders with these methodologies to advance the tools and the kind of work that we are interested in. And more recently, we have had impact even within policy making spheres, which is very interesting. So I leave it here. I don't want to take much more time, but we can discuss if some questions, some specific questions.
Brilliant, thank you, Annabelle and Andy, two really great presentations. And I'm just keeping my eye on the chat here. We've had a few questions coming through, and I think because there's not loads, I think I'll ask the people who've put them to unmute themselves and they can ask questions. So the first question, let me scroll up, and apologies for mispronunciation, Teresa Achieng. Would you like to unmute and put your question?
Yeah, thank you so much for both Andy and Annabelle for just such an amazing presentation. So my question, just like it came into my head while you're talking, because Andy talked about, he made a point about how methods can actually hack into cultures, and also how cultures can also kind of shape these kind of methods. And then in your talk, you talked about, you specifically mentioned traditional methods and questions. So I was just wondering, why did you go for that? Was that motivated by the need to use some local frameworks in your investigation, or was it just experimental for you? Or was it a way to kind of make research more ethical and respectful in the context of communities? That's my question, if that makes sense. Yeah.
Well, I can kick off. I mean, thank you, Teresa. That's a very rich question, actually. I'm not sure I can fully do justice to it, so we'll be pondering that for a while. But yes, basically, I think all the things you said, that, you know, if we take, for instance, we're working on it now and we're hoping to learn from colleagues, not least through this engagement, about what decolonizing, the challenge of decoloniality means for methods. But if it means challenging the deepest structures of power that operate often invisibly within us, because they're shaped by history in so many ways around race and class and gender and global structures, then actually the way that impinges on methods is that some of the categories we take for granted, old, new, the idea of scales and levels become problematic. So the idea of local, global themselves are part of that colonial, stratified way of looking at the world. So to that extent, then, yes, you can take some, the devils are in the detail. This is a rhizomic, non-scaled kind of problem. So you can look at what look like traditional methods and hack them. It's not that they're irredeemably in the wrong space. You know, you can do a sensitivity analysis in a cost-benefit analysis and really disrupt it. So it is an attempt to get to grips with some of the really deep challenges of decolonizing methods. At the same time, as you said nicely, paying respect to communities who are involved with these things. Every method is local somewhere, even though they may perform this global sort of imagination. They're local to some group. So yes, that's a way that it is exactly an attempt to pivot on those points you raised. At the same time, doing justice to the radical challenge of decoloniality and challenging power at that level, at the same time as recognizing that devils in details can sometimes be a help.
Thank you.
Annabelle, did you want to come in?
I think Andy responded to this question. We can leave the space for some other.
Okay, great. Well, we've had a couple of comments about the BioLeft experience that perhaps aren't questions. So just said very interesting. It'd be great to know more about Annabelle Marin's experience. And then there's a specific question from Elsa Valiente. Would you like to unmute and ask it, Elsa?
Hi, hello everybody. Thank you for the invitation to this seminar. I just was wondering about the presentation on BioLeft, if citizens have become involved in the initiative and how they, if they had, how did they do this? So especially in relation with reinforcing the local marketing and helping the farmers to commercialize, to sell their own products, no? So reinforcing the local chain markets. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Elsa. we have been in a process of gradually involving different kinds of stakeholders. So it has been a big challenge to involve farmers and different kind of farmers. We have been putting a lot of energy there because to begin with, the farmers that were and are more naturally involved are the ones that are have more resources because of the kind of time that you need to interact in an initiative like that, actively interact and be part. And also because, for example, you need access to internet or some way of accessing a number of things. So a big challenge for us has been that, and we put a lot of energy on that. But at the same time, we are integrating and involving and all the time thinking of involving different kinds of stakeholders. And so, for example, consumers, we are very concerned about including them because of the reasons that you mentioned precisely. And we are starting to do that associated to one of the experiments, which is in tomato. That one of the parts of this experiment involved actually a feedback from consumers. And we are working with small growers, and these are also consumers, if you want, and they are becoming more active in the initiative. But it is our full intention to really involve, like you say, thinking as consumers and citizens, thinking more on commercialization. That's a big issue for us that we have discussed and we are interested, but we haven't made a lot of advancements in this front yet.
Thanks, Annabelle. We've got a few more questions all about BioLeft here. From Dominic Glover, would you like to place this one? And there's a kind of related question following on about ecological benefits, which we'll hopefully get to as well. Dom, would you like to come in?
Sure, thanks Rose. Hello everyone, it's nice to see everyone on the screen, and it's exciting to get started on this STEPS year of methods, really interesting stuff. And thanks for the presentation. And Annabelle, welcome to IDS. I enjoyed the presentation. My question, which you can see in the chat box, is that your account of BioLeft emphasized the human components of this network or the collaboration. And I had the feeling that the plants and the seeds themselves didn't feature so prominently in the story. So I'm wondering, you know, the basis of this question is, we have a sort of hypothesis that the relations in which these plants and seeds are caught up should make a difference to their materiality and their performance in the world, and to the types of seeds and plants that get released. So I'm wondering if you have gathered any evidence that the seeds are emerging differently from these participatory breeding networks, or from the different ways of behaving with the seeds through BioLeft, is that actually producing some differences with the seeds and the plants themselves in terms of the types of crops that are created and their performance in terms of yield or disease resistance, or their yield variation or that kind of thing?
That's an excellent question. You put it very well. This is our hypothesis, because we are in the early stages. We cannot see a lot of the impact still on the material seeds, but we can see some because some of the experiments that already have a year. And so, for example, the work with corn has given some results already, and we are receiving feedback of people that is using the seeds and taking part of the process and experiments that have started to move in different directions. But even if we start to see results, it's going to take even longer, because there is a huge issue of multiplication and access. This is a change which is very complex, and so we are just at the beginning, and to see the real final impact is going to take some years. But we are very convinced that this is going to be the result. But you don't know, because at the same time maybe the results are others. We don't thinking about your question, which we have. We think it's very important also the kind of learning process we are doing as a group and in all the networks that are being developed. And we are surprised all the time of the things that emerge which we didn't expect. And some things go in directions that we didn't expect. And there may be results that are not the ones that we vision at the beginning, but that they go in the directions that we are interested, which is connecting people, giving tools for them to communicate, new ways of doing things, and with a hope, with a vision of something different. But Almendra is here, and I don't know, Alme, if you want to add something, because she's very much in the field with the experiments and the seed. Alme?
Well, thank you. Hi, everyone. Well, I see that the main change in seeds is that nowadays we are collecting, visibilizing, and experimenting with non-hybrid maize. And this is a great change because it allows the multiplication and the breeding with the seed variety, with the maize varieties. So I think that this is a really important kind of freedom for seeds to be able to reproduce themselves, keeping their features. And also, well, with tomato, the thing is that we are developing seeds based or focused on their taste. So this is a new kind of seeds too, and it's a new kind of concept and breeding horizon. So I think those are big changes. And I had a comment regarding the other, the citizens and consumers, because I think that their engagement has been unexpected, as Anabel was saying. For example, now there is a movement in Rosario, a province of Argentina, in which people are identifying themselves with bioleft vision or bioleft concept, and even without us, they are posting messages and identifying themselves with this way of sharing, of living, and of cultivating. So this was even, as Anabel was saying, co-owned, and we didn't have any influence, but it came up spontaneously. So that's great. Thank you.
Thanks all. There's another perhaps related question, Stephanie, and I'm not sure whether it's been answered in the previous discussions, but I think it's worth putting, since we're talking about transdisciplinarity. I think that the idea of where is the ecology and where is the environment is often a question and a concern of scientists coming from an ecological background. So Stephanie, are you happy to, would you like to pose your question or deepen the question at all?
Sure, thank you. Just very briefly, I was wondering if there's an ecological aspect to it, or let's put it differently, if you change innovation or try to change innovation in a way that fosters environmental sustainability, or if this is not a dimension that you're currently taking into account. Thanks.
Yes. One of the reasons why we started to work with BioLeft is because of the loss of biodiversity associated to the kind of dominant regime in the seed sector. And so we believe that in kind of supporting diversity, the diversity, like, of course, it's an hypothesis, like Dominic put it very well, because the results will take time in terms of material results, but we strongly believe that if you decentralize the process of knowledge creation, innovation, and exchange, and democratize them, you will have a kind of start to get back and also into the system, because a lot of the farmers are not sharing the seeds because they are concerned that the seeds will be stolen or patented by somebody, so they keep them. And this is problematic in terms of recreating diversity, accessing, and because we also have an institutional tool that we are developing that has its complications. It's an open source license to assure that these seeds will not be appropriated in the future. We are also working on this area to motivate sharing and circulation of the information and the seeds to kind of, with the aim of very strongly on with an environmental concern and trying to to address all the environmental challenges that we face in the seed sector because of we have 3 large firms that kind of explain. Yes. And this is a global move where Argentina, we are working in BioLF in Argentina, but it's a global network emerging with some initiatives in other countries working in similar, not the same, but similar directions. So hopefully this will become something that really creates an alternative to what we see now the market is pushing to. I hope I am. Andy.
Thanks. Andy, did you want to come in something briefly?
Yeah, just a quick wider methodological point on this question about taking seriously that seeds, that plants have agency, they have their own materiality in the work that Annabelle's described as more generally. It kind of goes around in a circle really, because there is a tendency to forget that, but there's also a tendency then sometimes to think that those materialities of the plants and the seeds and the agency speaks for itself automatically, or is somehow implicitly the preserve of a particular community of people. And then it can then lead to a kind of scientism where those who speak for plants are actually can be very narrow communities of accredited experts. So I think one of the exciting things about BioLeft, like so much else work going on around the world on this, is by engaging with different social groups, indigenous farmers, people who actually know the materialities and the agency of the plants and the seeds and the ecosystems that they're in. That's how those materialities can come through as well. So it's not either or, either how do plants or environments speak for themselves, or are you talking to people? They're inseparable in the end, and that's a very, I think, important methodological point.
Great, thanks. I'm quite conscious of time in that we should be moving on to the next presentation soon, but there's a couple of really great questions in the chat. So if I get them both to put them, and then if you can both respond as briefly as possible to both of them. So Lisbeth, would you like to unmute and ask your question? And then straight afterwards, yes. If Luis, if you would like to ask your question, that would be great, thanks.
Sure, thank you. This is a question for Andy. So I really enjoyed your thought-provoking account of the history of STEPS. And there were several phrases, but one stuck with me. So if I understood you correctly, you said, we've learned that organizations are irrelevant and what really matters are movements. So supposing I got your phrase right, that's the first if, would you like to expand a bit on that and perhaps clarify if this is something that comes from these years of you working with STEPS, or is it something that became really clear in this last year with everything that has changed with COVID?
Thank you. But we wait for another question, yes?
Yeah, Luis, if you could ask yours now, that'd be great.
Okay, just since the turn of the century, the 21st century, of course, the international organizations like USAID, FAO, and others use participation as a form of co-opting with the communities to open up to globalization. So is there a way in the methods or methodologies that we ensure that this don't happen? It's like you're working in good faith, but at the end you work for the devil. No, so then I don't know if it's it makes sense what I ask him.
Yeah.
Yeah. If what I know is that some of these organizations who supposedly are they work to help people, right, and to respond to the democratizations they have include the participation of people and communities to work with them in the programs that they develop. And but what they do at the same time is they co-opt this help, and they use the information that the communities provide to co-opt and to open up to globalization to the communities, like market or resources and so on.
Yeah.
So then the question is how you, through the methods, you make sure that that doesn't happen, right? Yeah. So for example, Annabelle what do you do to ensure that the information that you get will not go to organizations or corporations that later on will be not helping the community, but the other way around? Does that make sense? What?
Yes.
Great,
Okay.
thanks. Who wants to jump in and answer that one and the previous question fairly briefly, because then we need to move on to the next presentations. Thanks.
So I jump in straight with general, and then Annabelle, you pick up. Is that? Yeah. So Lisbeth, thanks very much for your question. I don't think my mouth is often not connected to my brain, so I may have said irrelevant, that organizations are irrelevant, but I actually intended to say, and what I think is on the slides, and I thought I said that they are expendable, which is quite a different thing, although the spirit of what you asked is still very relevant. So organizations are relevant because they are where culture and institutions come together, and methods are never plug and play. They're never separate from the practices and cultures and institutions that they're set in. Context matters, not only at the other end of the telescope of methods, but at the eyepiece end too. That context really matters. So organizations matter in that sense because there's very important structures go on there. But I was saying they're expendable, and if we become romantically attached to organizations, we then become vulnerable to our own little incumbencies, where this is how we do it, this is our way, we are the X people, whatever it might be, and that can then blind you to some of the challenges that we're trying to get at with these methods. So that was what I was trying to say, and I think it's in the spirit of your question. And on Luis's point, which is a really crucial one, how do you stop opening up being regressive? It's impossible to do justice to that here. We do not claim it's inherently progressive. Obviously, it again depends on context, but by and large, one of the most powerful ways, and the deeper the structures of coloniality or patriarchy, the more this is true. One of the most important ways in which power works, as Gramsci recognized, is through hegemony, through just constraining imaginations that we can't even imagine the alternatives. So imagining an alternative is not making it so, but it's a crucial first step. And so what opening up methods does is allow political discourse as a whole to engage with a wider range of alternatives than would otherwise be the case. It doesn't guarantee that those will be progressive or there'll be a better outcome. It just means that you're not vulnerable to the researcher thinking they somehow know already, because they're so motivated, they know what's right for less privileged people, and in bringing accidentally their own narrow ideas to the frame. So by opening up and making a space for others to come in, you can mitigate that danger, but it's not a panacea. There are dangers attached to it, and I think we need to remember your point. But for me, BioLeft is absolutely in that spirit. But Annabelle, you might want to come in there.
Yeah, no, but I will talk about that with an example I didn't have time to cover, which is the work on mining, which is because there it became very clear for us when we started to work that by proposing participation, and it was a danger because this is also something that is being proposed by the companies and by the governments trying to support investments in the industry. And so we did, and we are doing with Almendra again, a nice work here. It's more pragmatic, trying to really distinguish and understand the ways in which these dialogues and participation instances should be implemented and designed so you can use them in a transformative way and not as a way of buying social license, because the industry actually is using participation methods and is proposing ways to involve citizenships as a way of buying the license to operate in these local regions. So we in trying to really see in which ways we are thinking participation, and which is different to the mainstream. We are working on very specific issues related to the way in which this participation should happen, and addressing a lot of issues that I was going to show on a slide, these details, but I can share with you if you're interested. And in the case of BioLeft, we are very interested and concerned about the information that is being generated and will be generated, and already thinking about ways in which policies about governance about this data is something that we are concerned, and also all our stakeholders are very concerned, so we have to be concerned. Thank you.
Thanks all. We've had an apologies because I skipped over your question previously. Rico, would you like to briefly phrase your question for BioLeft? Bearing in mind we have to move on quite quickly, so we'll just take this one and then move on.
Hi. A question is that about human beings in all this work. Human beings are strange. They have different things that they like and they don't like. We may have some methods, we test the methods. In our experience, what we find is that values and beliefs about their work are going to influence their reception and accepting certain methods, as they're not neutral. How do you deal with this? And in this regard, of course, communication plays a major role. Everything is changing all the time. We know that in the universe. And to do that, there is no definitive permanent solution. So it has to be a continuously adapted one as we go through time and different things affect BioLeft or whatever it is. So communication then plays a major role in affecting participatory approaches, co-leadership, co-ownership, and so forth. Thanks.
If I'm not sure that I understood the question very well, but if it's about changing, maybe Andy, you have something. Yes.
Yeah, I can chip in. I think it's a great question about bias, and how do you deal with the bias in any method? And for me, it's part of what this arguing in the language I've tried to articulate of repertoires, of opening up, of greater humility for methods. That there is no method that's without bias, and attempts, whatever side, especially actually when they're on progressive side, with the intensity of those commitments, insisting that because it's so important to present the method as unbiased, it somehow must be just imagined to be so. That can come back and bite you very nastily. So it's a body language, as I tried to mention, of humility.
Yes,
helps
absolutely.
to guard against that, and opening up a space which you do not control. Others enter it. And you're not closing off categorically any kind of method, let alone group of political constituency. You're opening it up in that sense. So the biases get corrected by each other in a way that's not controlled from any cockpit that is itself prone to bias, even though it denies it. So it's not a final answer, but it does help, I think, to address that perennial point you made, humility.
Thanks. Thanks. We'll keep in touch.
Thank you.
Thank you all for all of your really great questions, and thanks Annabelle and Andy again for your presentations and your responses. I think we need to move on now, so I'd like to now give the floor to Lakshmi Charlie Joseph, who works at the National Laboratory for Sustainability Sciences at UNAM in research projects related to stakeholder engagement, governance, and transformations to sustainability in Mexico. She's part of the North America hub of the STEPS Pathways Network, where she coordinated the T-Labs project in Mexico. And she's also an academic advisor to the newly formed NGO Umbela Transformaciones Sostenibles. And following Lakshmi, we'll have Patricia Perez Belmont, who is the director of the Umbela NGO, and an organization that seeks to foster transformations to sustainability through innovation, transdisciplinarity, and capacity building. And she is also a PhD candidate in the Sustainability Science program at UNAM, focusing on the study of agrarian change in peri-urban contexts. So over to you, Lakshmi and Patty.
Thank you, Rose. Do you see my screen? So good morning or good afternoon, depending on where you are. My name is Lakshmi, and I will present some of the questions and learnings from a T-Lab project in Mexico, which was developed with this team of colleagues. After this, Patty will present how we will contribute to the methods year of the STEP Center with a project that is being currently developed and which was inspired from some of the insights that I will show now. So the role of human agency is crucial for transformations, as you for sure know. However, there is still insufficient empirical and methodological evidence on how to identify individual agency and how to enable the emergence of collective agency. Thus, one of the main general questions for this research was how to operationalize aspects of theories on transformations to sustainability with diverse communities of practice by designing and implementing transdisciplinary methods. And in particular, in what ways can interventions foster the emergence of collective agency? The project was focused on the diverse ways to frame challenges and actions related to rapid urbanization around an iconic and degraded urban wetland in Mexico City, and how this could be related to a loss in the sense of agency. So over the course of almost 3 years, we worked with a small and diverse group of agents to co-produce a process with no clear outcome in terms of a tangible result predefined by the academics involved. Therefore, we saw an opportunity to design a process that was focused on reframing and its potential to enable collective agency, where we could also explore some of the constitutive elements of the pathways approach that I will later mention. So the first idea is that our reframing process was an iterative process conceptualized as safe enough spaces to nurture reflexivity and connections. And some of the important questions that were present along this challenge were, for example, how can we design a space where different logics of seeing the world coexist and a sense of group agency is co-created, and of course, without losing the individual's autonomy and differences? Or how to foster inspiration and hope while also exploring the barriers for change towards more sustainable futures. So the main general hypothesis was that the movement from individual agency to collective agency may occur in an orchestrated process of reframing. So during our project, different interactions were held, all with the aim of enabling deeper understandings and social bonding, for example, in terms of connections and collaborations, while embracing the plurality of visions. So the reframing was around the following elements: the system, so its challenges, problems, boundaries, and its possible desired pathways for change, the systems of beliefs, so values, meanings, and the perception of the self and of others in the system. So for example, in terms of the position of an agent in the system, the role, the powers and capacities, the interests, priorities, alliances, and practices. So if we further unpack the process into reframing cycles, and since in any methodological endeavor comprised in a normative-driven process, we also delved into questions that were always present. Questions such as, for which particular aims do we need reframing? Through which methods should we facilitate a process for change? And how do we make explicit the rationale behind an intervention? So the reframing cycles were characterized in terms of narratives, because although they are always incomplete, they are the verbal stories and sense-making derived from individual and collective experiences. In this sense, narratives represent the access to a deeper level of felt understandings and meanings expressed in how things are done in everyday life, as well as in attitudes, perceptions, behaviors. So the overall aims of the interactions we designed in each cycle were: for deconstructing narratives, we aimed at questioning dominant discourses and meanings. For creating new narratives, we facilitated making individual agency visible and also subject of reflection. And for materializing such new narratives, we fostered the redesign and co-creation of new possibilities for action. For this project, there were some constitutive elements of the pathways approach that Andy explained that were for us useful to operationalize the process. In particular, we highlight these four that were articulated through the aims I just mentioned. So opening up and broadening out wider discourses and possibilities for action through an explicit focus on the importance of eliciting the diverse framings and the rationales behind, which then could help in understanding and questioning dominant narratives and exploring alternative pathways. So to illustrate how we operationalize the approach, here are some of the particular methods we used for facilitating the deconstruction, creation, and materialization of narratives. So for example, we experienced workshops to explore and reflect around diverse parts of the system, as well as different practices developed by some of the participants, so to try to foster bridging encounters. We mapped our capacities and powers to work towards desired futures by developing avatars. We designed a game called the Pathways to Sustainability game, where we could simulate moments that needed collective agency. If you are interested in knowing other methods we used along the process, you can check this guide we developed, which can be downloaded from the STEP Center website. So there are 4 insights that I would like to share to conclude this presentation. The first one is that affectivity matters. As a result of the reframing process, we observe not only the emergence of more systemic narratives, but also more empathetic narratives. So for this type of initiatives, we think it is crucial to navigate tensions between types of framings and transcend the notion that rational framing is merely Cartesian, but not also affective. The second one is that the challenge of reframing, of remaining, committed and involved, even after a project ends, depends on how meaningful is the co-created space, and that the ownership belongs to all, not the conveners or facilitators. The third one is that although we did not explicitly work around tackling asymmetric power relations, notions of power were constantly discussed, and we see the potential of identifying and discussing in more depth the diverse political orientations to better understand the positionalities and rationales behind the interventions proposed. And the last one is that we need to be methodologically rebellious in order to genuinely be an active part of a transdisciplinary process that aims at contributing to transformations research, so to articulate a diversity of very time-consuming participatory methods while resisting to the concrete product result rationale. And so to also be open to challenge our own agency as researchers. And lastly, these are some of the particular issues that served as inspirations for the next project that Patty will present. Deepen the understandings around transformations and ways to generate other types of impact outside academia, and therefore further question the role of academia and explore alternative collective capacities, agency, and methodologies, question the logics and rationales for intervening, and of course, nurture a meaningful network of strategic allies. Thank you very much. And with this, I give the floor to Patty.
Thank you, Lakshmi. Do you see my presentation? Thanks. Well, thank you all for being here with us today. I'm very happy to see many familiar names, and I'm going to follow up on Lakshmi's presentation and talk to you about 2 topics. One is about how our organization, Umbela Sustainable Transformations or Transformaciones Sostenibles, was formed very recently, and to share with you our vision and approaches. And the other is about the project we will develop during the methods year of the STEP Center, a project that is coordinated by us with Lancis and Imas from UNAM and ASU. So about our organization, as mentioned, one of the reflections that emerged during the TLAB project, in which I was also a participant, was about the role of the academia in the generation of capacities and collective action, and the importance of forming collaborative networks outside academia to understand what transformations towards sustainability entail and how to create different types of social ecological impact. These questions were recurrent not only during the TLAB, but also in discussions with friends and colleagues during the PhD in sustainability, friends that are here today. And from those discussions, we decided to create an alternative space where we could continue exploring ways to promote pathways to sustainability. And that's how Umbela was born, as some sort of wave, as Andy was said before in his metaphor. So one of our main interests is to question, explore, and create new meanings and understandings to address the social ecological problems and to contribute to the collective will for change. At Umbela, we aimed at promoting and be guided by the values that are illustrated here in the center of the image, And our 4 main approaches here in the margins that we want to explore with our work are disruptive innovation, transgressive learning, transdisciplinarity, and decolonizing praxis, which is the approach that we will mostly explore with our first project. All this in order to seek through our work and projects more transversal, reflective, and collaborative methodologies for sustainable futures. So now I'm going to tell you a little bit about the project Cultivating Ways of Knowing for Transformations. And as it was mentioned before, one of the important aspects of challenging research is that the production of knowledge itself is marked by asymmetric power relations that perpetuate inequalities. So one of the challenges is to open up transformative spaces that broaden the understandings of the world to have a greater impact and include other ways of praxis. And to do so, we must move out from our comfort zones by questioning identities, hierarchies, power relations, politics, and ways of creating knowledges. So with this project, we're going to have conversations with a diversity of actors, mainly non-academics, to expand the discussion on how to give more room for other ways of knowing and relating to the world, exploring methods, voices, and practices that look for more radical changes. And through the conversations, we will also like to design a first version of a co-produced methodology that questions ways of knowing and doing, while we also explore how to decolonize ourselves to make room for these other ways of praxis. The design of the conversatorios from the Spanish word conversatorios came from the concept of radical, that means roots. So radical changes involve looking deep into the roots. And during the conversatories, we want to share experiences that can help us to unlearn and reposition ourselves so that more transformative initiatives can hopefully emerge from there. And we are using planting as a metaphor that guides the methodology for our 4 conversatories. The first has to do with preparing the soil from the roots. A soil that we know that is degraded, so it does not allow new ideas and new knowledges to flourish. We call this conversatory Regenerated the Soil for New Roots, in which we will explore questions such as how do we encourage a polyculture ways of knowing and doing, and how do we incite and mobilize deeper changes. And after removing the soil, and because so far humanity has prioritized monocultures and industrialized agriculture that have not given room for diverse plants to grow, we then must recover hidden seeds to plant them and in a soil where they can be better integrated. So with this idea, our second conversatory is Planting Shared Dreams, where we will address questions about how do we implement plural visions that might be in tension, and how do we build bridges between these different visions. And after seeding comes the harvest of the diversity of seeds that we plant, or in this case, of the different types of knowledges and ideas that grow. Thus, our third conversatory is called Gathering Knowledges, and that is how do we embrace the diversity of knowledges to co-create horizontal transformative futures and implement shared ideas. And finally, once we have gone through all this process, it is important to maintain it and work hard so that the cycle continues. So our fourth conversatory is Caring for and Nurturing the Ground, because caring implies affectivity. So we will explore what transformative alternatives exist to foster empathy, and how affectivity can be related to an enduring feeling for collective agency for change. So with this metaphor, we believe that if the soil is regenerated, if we exchange alternative seeds, if we let go the idea of the monoculture as a notion that there is only one way to cultivate knowledge, then new ideas can emerge from a plural and rich base. and praxis can move closer to an epistemic, environmental, and social justice. So the conversatories will be held through the year until August, and we will publish the content in short videos and blogs. And we will also contribute with the insights of the conversatories in workshops with our colleagues in STEP Center and in ARIN in Kenya, and other guests to discuss the ideas and praxis involving in this opening up and broadening out that Andy talked about earlier in sustainability research. So I hope you are interested in following the project. As I said, you will find the videos and publications soon in our website. Here is our contact if you want to keep in touch. And thank you very much for listening. And now I guess I pass the word to our friends from Kenya. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot, Patty and Lakshmi. Really great presentations. And I'm just seeing from the chat that lots of people are loving the metaphor. But I'm going to move on now to introduce our colleagues from Kenya. Quite conscious of time, we've got 25 minutes, so to allow us to get to some plenary discussion. So we have Joel Onyango, who is a fellow at the Africa Research and Impact Network, ARIN, and the focal point for the ARIN Ash Summer School, which is going to be taking place in summer. He is also a research fellow at the African Centre for Technology Study, with a focus on science, technology and innovation, climate change adaptation and mitigation, water and food security, entrepreneurship and markets, and sustainable development. We also have Johannes Atella, who's the convener of the Africa Research and Impact Network and a senior research fellow and head of Climate Resilient Economies program at the African Centre for Technology Studies. He also coordinates the North-South Research Partnership for ACTS through the Africa Sustainability Hub. And as part of his passion to spur research excellence and intellectual leadership in Africa, he founded the Africa Research Impact Network, ARIN. So over to you, Joel, to kick us off.
Thanks, Rose, for that introduction. And I think I'll ask Janice at some point to make a quick introduction of himself. Janice, if you're there. I think you're on mute, sorry.
Mute. This is something which happens quite a number of times. But yeah, I was just saying thanks, Rose, for that introduction already, and thanks, Joel, for taking up the challenge. And apologies to the audience. I'm a bit late into the meeting, so I might not be in the right sort of framework to be able to understand the progress of the discussion. But certainly, from a general perspective, I do appreciate that this is a very timely discussion for Africa, and where the research and policy transformation that Africa is very interested in. I think this is really the platform. This is the space to engage with. So because my colleague Joel has been part of the discussion throughout, so I'd let him to proceed with the discussion. Otherwise, I'm really happy to listen to the debates and some of the striking points, and to reconnect with some of the key mentors in this particular forum, Andy Starling and others. You are great guys, and thanks.
Thanks, Jonas. Just to actually emphasize that in the context of many things that we have been doing within this framework of opening up, broadening out, and the conversation about multiplicity of pathways, we are, as part of this, we sort of are moving towards thinking of building capacity development, in the sense that, to decolonize how people look at methods, how people use methods. And for this particular presentation, of course, the focus is going to be on a few parts of this. First, just giving a context on how we ended up with Africa Sustainability Hub, and then transformed the morph to ARIN, African Sustainable Impact Network, and then the connection between that and why we see it necessary and we contribute to these discussions about decolonizing research and research methods in Africa based on different activities. ideally, when you look at our context and based on our experience, both within the Africa Sustainability Hub and also the African Research and Impact Network, we recognize that there are a lot of things happening in terms of research. A lot of research is happening, and from researchers within the continent, out of the continent. But in the end, there's a growing gap in whether the research being done is contextually fitting the reasons. And it's often you see a lot of research, a lot of funding goes into, say, Africa, but does it really transform into impacts that we can, count? I mean, someone give an example in one of the conversations in one of these online sessions that we've done a lot of research on food security, but why are we not becoming food secure and stuff like that? So, I mean, there are nuances and there are complexities around that, but largely we think that the space for people to, open up that conversation and to look at options that would promote contextualized solutions and research framing that can transform how we think is still sort of underdeveloped in many cases. And that's the context under which we thought about Africa Sustainability Hub and the Africa Research Impact Network. Ideally, coming from an thought that a lot of these studies, a lot of research collaborations, a lot of the research agenda is mainly top-down. We could almost use the word imposed in terms of the context that doesn't allow for people to think of what we actually can do with the capacity we have, and coming up with homegrown solutions. And just, of course, the last year we've had a lot of issues with COVID-19. And when you're trying to look at that space, for example, realize that a lot of the African researchers have been sort of shocked into reality of the need to have homegrown solutions and to build into that capacity for homegrown solutions. And of course, that brings in the issue of how do we co-create knowledge and sort of challenge power that is incumbent to how knowledge is generated or used. So from that perspective, of course, the Africa Sustainability Hub was part of the global hubs under the STEPS Center hubs, together with, what Patty just explained from Mexico, and we had other partners in India and China. That particular South-South, North-South partnership was actually towards expanding the space for development pathways. And it's in that space that then we were able to do a few things, including some kind of, we did some transformative research using different methodologies. For example, the T-Labs that was also done in Kenya, looking at PAYGO systems when it comes to mobile technology and solar technology. So we also did some nurturing of talents. We did some trainings on this, basically expanding the capacity. And we also had some strategic dialogues. People talked about sustainability and what that means for policy. But in all this, of course, we sort of kept missing one thing. How do we continue with the people who've gone through the process of training, learning, have learned about opening up, broadening out? How are they able to foster peer learning and continuous learning among the people who are in that space? The other question we are faced with about how do we pivot the learning and leverage on the skills that have been sort of developed towards making a change? You're already seeing situations where, when you think about Africa and SDGs, it's called it's still struggling. So how do we then pivot the skills and all the thoughts that are aligned to opening up and broadening out and thinking about multiplicity of options to actually transform into solutions? And it's this basis that we were facing with the Sustainability Hub, that we thought perhaps we needed something that opens up that space and fosters ideally connections that allow for peer learning. And this is a space that Irene joined into the equation. And as a network already, it has over 80 members within the continent, with working at least in 25 countries. The idea is that as a platform, it's leveraging on the work that all these researchers are doing in a way that it can promote some kind of unified voice to challenge what we have in terms of research, to build a capacity that then tries to give a collective sort of action when it comes to agency for researchers in Africa to make a difference. And if you look at that perspective, I mean, we have both we are thinking about both thematic areas, but we're also thinking about analytical approaches. And it's in these analytical approaches that you start recognizing that, you know, we are looking at different disciplines. We are looking at different approaches. We are looking at different target groups. We are opening up the space for people to think about solutions that are associated with sustainability development. But now, with the experience from both what we have as the Africa Sustainability Hub and the Africa Research and Impact Network, we now are taking up the whole bit of, you know, as you think about bottom-up sort of approach. We are talking to people, you know, prioritizing things like co-production, prioritizing co-creation. We are looking at not advising policy by, you know, prescriptive methods, but by opening up the space for policymakers to use evidence that, you know, can be able to inform specific areas of outreach and specific areas of action. And in the end, we do realize one important thing, and that's one of the area that this particular project fits in, that there has to we have to start thinking about how to decolonize science and, you know, associated methods, and how we actually do the decolonizing of this space. Now, we had a session a couple of weeks ago that was trying to contextualize decolonizing methods and how that fits within the African agenda. And one of the things that emerged was that when you're thinking about decolonizing methods in the African context, you have to think about free thinking, you know, basically being able to innovate and engage in that innovation that can contribute to scholarly activism. There was a question earlier, I think someone was asking about how do we then challenge the normative, the priority set by certain, so for example, agencies. And one of these spaces is in scholarly activism. And when we try to unpack this definition associating free thinking and the capacity to act, the agency of the researchers, we end up with, you know, for example, push for free thinking. And free thinking is not in the sense that now let's do things however we want, however it comes, however it falls into place, but more about thinking about the context that we work in, the knowledge that is already available with the local experiences, and how to challenge basically the dominant ideas, not that they're not good, but gives us a space to start thinking of how to create change, how to articulate some of these methods and bring them to a level of implementation at our own context. The other aspect of this is, of course, challenging incumbent power. And this is highly associated with the fact that when you think about coloniality, there's association with, you know, political sort of rule, the colonial rule over certain, you know, kind of subordinate countries. But now, moving on, we are looking at decolonizing as an aspect that challenges what is already there, which requires that we have to come up with counter aspects around how to move the normative, how to change what could be considered incumbent. And this is challenged both from a research disciplinarity context to something else in relation to how we relate with partners. The other aspect that also emerged in our discussion is the need to have this co-production. I think that conversation already started earlier. When you're thinking about decolonizing, we need to think about spaces that allows us to co-produce. And co-production requires that we are context specific, we are context based, we open up space for pluralistic views by explicitly recognizing some of these options, both what we know and what we don't, but in the sense, trying to articulate specific areas of goals that we can achieve within that context, and of course, make that space interactive. Now, the other thing that also emerged is that when you think about decolonizing methods, you can't go without looking at the philosophy behind a lot of the things that happen, the space that it opens up for what has been there before. You know, when you think about, and one of our colleagues was also mentioning the question around Ubuntu in Africa and how that affects the ontology or epistemology that is associated with methods, either in research or in practice. In the end, one of the things that we sort of came out with is that when you think about decolonizing methods, you cannot think about one layer of doing things, one specific area of implementation. There's multiple layers, there are multiple dimensions that are associated with this. In this multiple dimensionality, you can look at, whether within a discipline there are certain powers that are dominating specific research methods. There's also the perspective of, whether someone is male or female, whether they are considered junior or senior, and the relationships that brings when it comes to use and application of different methods. Not to mention the fact that we have north-south, south-south research partnerships and all that. I think the final message in that space, the discussion we had, is trying to challenge in some sense the dominant, the normative, what is to not throwing away, for example, the passive ideas, but also innovating in that space. And when we then decolonize, we offer space for people to participate, for action and for innovation. As part of the conclusion in this, we did sort of think about several themes that could be really resourceful when you think about decoloniality of methods, especially in Africa. One of those was basically what already has been talked about a lot in terms of valuing diversity, the space to open up thinking, for the space to broaden out the outputs out of research and that. The other aspect is challenging power, and Lakshmi has put it very well. We need to sort of build some kind of methodological rebellion of some kind. This is challenging power, scholarly activism, pushing for change through research that basically cannot, there's some kind of legitimization associated with that. We cannot do this without integrating this into education system, for example, and therefore philosophical underpinnings that are associated with methods, whether we are thinking about Ubuntu or not, but all that is in terms of the philosophy that underpins certain methods in research. We also need to, at the back of mind, think about decolonizative methods when we are articulating research, and articulation here would not just necessarily mean we are taking a method and we are putting it into this space for us to just customize, but we are considering the pros and cons of different methods and how the implication they have in the different co-production spaces that they provide. And lastly, the space on multidimensionality of research. And, thinking about different collaboration types, different kind of disciplines that could be used to challenge incumbency among researchers and research methods. Based on these lessons that we learned from our contextualizing, we are planning a few activities, and in line with our colleagues in Tumbela and the STEP Center, we are going to have a series of seminars. We are going to have a book project that is going to be based on the themes that we just looked through. And also we are planning to have a summer school later in the year, basically to build capacity that challenges the dominant ideas in research, not to throw the dominant out, but to look at spaces that allows us to open up and challenge that. And ideally, this would require that you participate in the seminars for who are interested, get in touch with us, or contribute to our book. And you're also welcome to either facilitate or participate in our summer school. And without forgetting that within the context that we have, the Africa Research and Impact Network, that particular network also annually incorporates fellows. And in that fellowship, you're able to provide space to engage in ideas, including decolonizing methods. Thank you very much. And back to you, Rose.
Brilliant. Thanks so much. Well, it's fantastic to see all the conversations going on in the chat with people sharing information on websites, etc. We've already noted in the chat that we will have one last Menti question for everybody. And just because we're a bit short on time, if you can think about that as we have the last plenary. So the questions about what might be missing or is underexplored in the current conversations around transdisciplinary methods for sustainability. And essentially it's an opportunity for you to make a pitch for themes that you might like us to continue discussing in this year. But we do have a few minutes, so I'd like to just gather a few thoughts that came through the chat in reaction to Lakshmi and Patty, your presentation, and to ask you if you might reflect a bit more on this idea of being methodologically rebellious, which clearly has resonated with lots of people in the audience, and the extent to which that also links to some of these ideas around the role of emotions and empathy that you mentioned, and how that plays into what you're planning on doing this year with Umbela. So maybe if you could reflect on that for a couple of minutes.
Yeah, I can start if it's okay, Patty. There was also a question that is related to this one, that how do we identify values and meanings in the project I shared. Well, the word identifying is a little bit complicated for me, but and going back to the methodologically rebellious, one of the challenges for us was how to articulate the method. So not a method per se will help identifying a particular set of values, but the articulation of some of the methods. So for example, we used Q method or Q methodology. We did some mapping of the values at the beginning and at the end. And obviously semi-structured interviews. So there was a lot of conversations and qualitative data that what we used with the other types of methods was to triangulate the different narratives, as I said. So it's not one method that identifies a value or a meaning, but how the methods could foster richer conversations to go deeper and talk about meanings and values, about a system or about a relationship between actors. So yeah, that's what I can quickly think now for us for the project. I don't know if Patty, you want to share something with the new project?
Yes, about the affectivity and empathy. We want to have in one of the conversatories to explore some experiences and efforts of people that are trying to be more get more involved in, for example, artivism, like merging art with activism. And there are so many things that we've been looking for, like using dance to explore ways of to share knowledge, or by doing some art. And because this sometimes we've seen in some organizations that these types of activities can open the conversations, can facilitate yes, like spaces for new ways of doing stuff and have a conversation. So yeah, we're going to look for these efforts and try to show them during one of the conversatories.
Great, thanks so much. And just picking up on a few of the points in the chat for Joel and Janice. So there's a couple of comments there about what it is that we need to decolonize. So yes, methods, but also ourselves. And I think one comment refers to the need to decolonize data itself. So I wonder if you could reflect a little bit on the different dimensions of what it is that we are decolonizing. And also a question that was asked by Sung-Ki Kim around problems in the current research partnership and collaboration arrangements between Global North and your work in Africa. So those two questions, if you have a few minutes to reflect, we're almost out of time.
Thanks, Marina. I'll try to handle the dimensionality when it comes to decoloniality. One of my final slides actually was recognizing that decolonizing methods or decolonizing research has a lot to do with many dimensions that need to be figured out. We, in our contextualization seminar a couple of weeks ago, one of the things that we realized is that even the definition of decolonizing differs from different perspectives. And if the definition of decolonizing methods already differs, means that the complexities and the dimensions that are associated with decolonizing methods is way different from one perspective to another. So we try to capture the different thoughts, and I think part of the book is supposed to go towards that in terms of documenting some of the cases. And as a case study, of course, there's a methodological underpinning and the argument towards what exactly is being decolonized as part of research. So we are really hoping that this year actually offers a lot of thinking and a lot of answers to some of those questions as to what is the priority to be decolonized and what is actually practical to be decolonized in the time frame, both of the project, but also of the network in itself, both from a perspective of research ideas, research underpinnings, the philosophical aspects that are associated with that, without forgetting Andy's work on opening up and broadening out as an option. Thank you. And for the other question, I wanted to invite Jonas to respond on the partnership aspect.
Jonas, we have 1 minute, so any quick reflections? Oh, you're muted.
I guess the question was about how we use partnerships to.
It's about, the question was about the challenges that you might be experiencing with research partnerships as they are currently between the North.
Yeah, I think that there are many challenges, but I think the key one is actually centered on the element of sustainability. If you look at the SDG number 17, we are looking at partnerships as one of the key goals, and we are looking at sustainable partnerships. So a lot of partnerships in Africa are really doing well, but they are mainly based on maybe what I'll call short-term projects. And once the projects end, so the partnerships also sort of, fizzles away. So that kind of sort of projectized partnership approach, which is very common in many African settings, has actually hampered of course, the ability to also have really very strategic discussions when we think about decoloniality, but also when we think about contextualizing some of the most strategic and innovative methodologies. I know I have 1 minute, but certainly I think as part of the decoloniality debate, which I think Joel has answered very well, we need to really see the decoloniality as a system, not as a sort of particular items, but as a system which is sustained by particular processes, by particular dominant narratives, by particular actors, by particular power relations. And some of these are certainly kind of embedded within the element of partnership. So I think I really look forward to also looking at this more broadly. Thanks.
Brilliant. Thanks so much, Jonas, and for being succinct. So we've come to the end of our session. And so we want to say thank you so much to all of our speakers, Andy, Annabelle, Lakshmi, Patty, Joel, and Jonas, for taking the time to be with us today and sharing your experiences. And also to all of you for engaging with us on Menti and also in the chat. We will be talking with you throughout this year, we hope. So look out on the STEPS website for activities as they come up. And we'll be using some of the content from this discussion to post some reflections on this event and what it stimulated for us. And we hope that you've also found it stimulating. And here are some of the things that people would like to take forward into the discussion. So Rose, if there's any last thoughts, we can say thank you very much and goodbye to everyone.
Yeah, thank you all. No last thoughts. It's been really, really great conversation, and we look forward to having more of these over the course of the year. Thanks for staying all this time with us.